What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp. You're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, where we bring you ideological ingredients to brew your own faith. That's right, we don't think for you, we think with you. That's right, I read books, I interview people, you listen, then you say, how's this an ingredient for me to brew my own faith? And maybe I don't like it, maybe I dig it, maybe it's awesome, maybe I put it right here. You know what I mean? And today Donna Bowman's back on the podcast. Say what? Donna Bowman's back on the podcast from Conway, Arkansas. All of Conway just jumped up and said, what? That's us. Well, Donna's back on the podcast. Been on here before. And she is the author of the upcoming Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Being Human. And I interviewed her after I just finished final edits, and writing the inserts. There are these 4 characters in each of the 10 Homebrewed Christianity guidebooks. The different doctrines, different concepts, different ideas. The 10 guidebooks. And I write these inserts, these jokes or comments or insights or questions that come from 4 characters. The acolyte, deacon, elder, bishop. And those of us who edit it and work through it and add these things, like, we're going through Donna's book and we're like, oh my goodness, this is so awesome. Then I said, Donna, we got to interview you. I want people to get to know you, reminded of your voice if they hadn't really connected with this podcast in the last 2 years, because she was on a couple times previously. It's almost our 10th birthday. And we get on, we start talking, and all of a sudden what comes up? 2 different things. One, the tale of 2 headwears. One headwear, the MAGA hat, the Make America Great Again hat. Donald Trump style red hat, mass produced in China somewhere, probably. And then the hand knitted pussy hats of the Women's March. She does on the ground interviews and such, and has a book coming out and a number of articles looking at the Women's March resistance and the people that knitted pussy hats. And I say that just because we've not had a pussy hat episode on Homebrewed Christianity. But today, you're going to have a pussy hat episode. Not only that, she's writing one of the reflections for the Make Advent Great Again series. That's right, no need for a red hat full of hate, xenophobia, patriarchy, hierarchy, and all that ugliness. No, get a purple hat. Say Make Advent Great Again. Resist the war on Advent. Trying to pack it full of Christmas songs. No. The 12 days of Christmas come on the 25th on up to Epiphany. Epiphany is similar to Epiphany. That's the day we celebrate the wise man's identification of this poor Jewish peasant's child, Jesus, as king and not Herod. That's Epiphany. Yeah, because they were the first Gentiles that said, what's up? Oh, Jesus, this Jew's the Christ. That's Epiphanation. And we're going to have an Epiphanation this year. If you don't know, if you're new listening, Epiphanation's a small interactive drinking theological game that happens for the people of Homebrewed Christianity that want to hang out on the internet that day. But I'm just saying, Make Advent Great Again is an ongoing through Advent group we're having. You can join me, Mike Morrell, John Pavlovich. We got friends writing reflections every day. We got weekly video interactive engagements and a secret group on Facebook where we can all share and make it through the holiday season, figuring out whether you want to engage those that differ from you dramatically, raise your anxiety, get you frustrated, make you go, oh my goodness, why are they like that? Or if you just want to say, yeah, for my well-being, I think I'm just going to talk about the superiority of Cars 1 to Cars 3, which it is superior, but Cars 3 is superior to the Planes movies and Cars 2. Because Cars 2, I love Cars movies, but Cars 2, the centerpiece of it really wasn't the community of friends. Mater took a too central role. And then you throw in James Bond for cars, and the myth of redemptive violence gets involved, and it's problematic. So, yeah. It goes Cars 1, Cars 3, Cars 2, Planes. If you add the Adventures in Mater shorts, then those definitely come between Cars 3 and Cars 2. If you're wondering. Anyway, we're going to talk about pussy hats. We're going to talk about Make America Great Again hats. You can join, make an Advent Great Again group. Just go to homebrewedchristianity.com or makeadventgreatagain.com. But I also want to say, upcoming in North Carolina on the 7th and 8th of December are 2 different live podcasts. On the 7th, say what? We're going to be in Winston-Salem. On the 8th, on the 7th, Bill Leonard's going to be there. On the 8th, we're going to be in Cary at Christ the King Lutheran Church. And then on the 16th, we're going to be in Washington, D.C. and the brothers from another mother, Crackers and Grape Juice friends, are going to be there. I was told there's a chance Diana Butler Bass is coming and a couple other people, but I don't want to speak for anybody else. But if the DBB is going to be there, it'll be good. Because you know what? We're going to give Jason a hard time about being a Bardian in public. Okay? But if you're coming on the 16th and you're interested in being a part, by that I mean camp counselors for Theology Beer Camp when it goes to DC, then you should just plan on staying after and hanging out for a while. All right? Yeah. Now, this is my conversation with Donna Bowman. You're going to say to yourself, can I pre-order the Homebrewed Christian Guide to Being Human? You can. Just go to homebrewedguides.com. You can pre-order that one book, or you can get all 10 books for $110 with a whole bunch of perks to it, like 7 or 8 different classes that I did with me, Peter Rollins, Philip Clayton, and friends. And you'll get free shipping and like some stickers and junk. So I'm just saying, go to homebrewguides.com if you like to pre-order her book. You can get all 10 of the books. On top of all that, I haven't even told you our discussion on pop culture. And her husband is a pop culture, like, online writer, blogger, critical engager. And we had a lot of comments, and it got so exciting. And I'm just saying, there's like so much in this episode, you don't even know what you're going to do. But you want to know one of the things Donna and I have in common? This is a secret. We're both on Team Process. Okay. It wasn't that big a secret. But currently, right now, for the next couple of weeks, there's a giant Process Theology giveaway. We call it the Process Theology Nerd Book giveaway. And if you enter, our friends at the Center for Process Studies and Process Century Press, we're giving away for 5 people 20 different books totaling $800 in worth. Each person gets $800 worth of theology books, and the grand prize winner gets an additional 15 books. And it's all process, theology, goodness. Enter that junk. Tell your friends to join. Because with one victory, right before Christmas, you could end up with 35 theology books showing up on your desk. You could give the ones you don't want to all your theology nerd friends to say, thank you. What a great Christmas present. Keep the other ones that you didn't have already. And they're going to say, well, you must have got a raise. And you're going to say, no, I listen to Homebrewed Christianity. Or don't tell them at all. Don't tell them at all. Just make them feel like you're grateful and you picked an excellent book for them. All right? Well, here's Donna Bowman talking to me today. Okay? Oh, and thank you for everyone. Last week we had 3 new people join Homebrewed Community, the people that donate every month. If you are interested, go to homebrewedcommunity.com. I forgot to mention that earlier, so I'm just passing on it. Here's Donna. And Donna, thanks for coming on, because you're awesome. Peace. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. You get to hear from the one and only Donna Bowman today. Thank you for coming back on the podcast, Donna.
I'm thrilled to be here, Tripp. It's great to be back with you on the podcast.
Oh, well, I'm excited. And I thought we had to have Donna back on. We had to get to talk about all sorts of stuff so people get to know you before the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Being Human comes out, which is fantastic. I mean, it's really excellent.
Thank you. It was a great experience, and I want to write more books like that now that I got a taste of, writing for your great audience and in that style. It was really fun.
Well, it definitely read like you'd done it plenty of times. And maybe that's because, unlike a lot of systematic theologians, you work as part of you teach a lot of interdisciplinary classes. You're married to a pop culture TV critic, and you're a theologian who's made this transition. And I know people may not believe this, but you're a theologian who does qualitative research, which means you talk to real humans.
Yeah, I think real humans are actually good sources for theology. This is it's not something we're trained to do. It's not something we're taught to do. We're taught to sit in our offices and read our books and go to our libraries. And hey, I love that stuff, man. There's nothing I love more than just holding up in an archive or in a library and thinking thoughts and reading those communications from the past. But you got to realize that people are texts too. And to find out what's actually going on and making sense to people where they live, I think this is a great intersection between the church and theologians is to try to read the theological books of in the pews, because that's theology that works for people, unlike the kind of things that we think about and write about a lot.
So what would you say was the turning point in your life where you decided I'm gonna be an academic, a scholar, a theologian, and invest my vocational time and energy in education?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really inspired by Norb Shedler, who was the guy who hired me here at the University of Central Arkansas, a philosopher of religion, someone who had a passion for reaching people with, in what he called sort of an underserved, population, a kind of a mission field for the intellect. Here in Arkansas, he came from Princeton, and he thought that people here would benefit from the same kind of education he got in Ivy League schools. And when he came to hire faculty, he was really looking for people who could provide a kind of existential experience for students, who could reach them with challenging questions. I think that's something that you and your audience know a lot about. That's what motivates you, and that's what motivates people to get involved with you and with Homebrewed, is that kind of bite to the questions, bite to the ideas. So teaching for me, and I think for a lot of us, is a way of replicating something that we experienced when we were in education, somebody who grabbed us with an idea that wasn't just intellectual, but was existential. Theology has that potential for a lot of us because our lives are so suffused with existential moral questions that arise out of the theological religious realm.
So when you were, and people find out more about your kind of upbringing and changing and stuff when they read the Guide to Being Human, but in there you mentioned growing up in a more evangelical context. And I wonder, what was that first question you had that hit at an existential level, that you said, yeah, I'm not putting this question down and I'm not taking the answer I was handed. This question I'm going to wrestle with, even if I have to sit here a while till a more beautiful resolution comes about.
Yeah, that's a great question. I tell this story a lot to my students. I say, we were in church, of course, 3 times a week, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening, every time the doors were open, as they say. And
I understand. Southern Baptist preacher's kid. Come on.
Yes, absolutely. So at a certain point, you're young, you're in the service, you can read comic books or whatever. But at a certain point, that's frowned upon. And you have to, you're supposed to start listening to the sermon. But I always tell my students, one book that you will never get criticized for reading in church is the Bible. You can always open up your Bible, which you're supposed to have with you. My Good News Bible with the little cartoon drawings remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, those were the 60s style line cartoon drawings. And I would read the Bible, and I would read the Old Testament. And I think the biggest moment for me when I realized something's going on, there's something underneath what's going on in church is that there's these stories in the Old Testament that nobody ever preached on. I never heard a sermon on, Uzzah, my favorite dude, Uzzah, who, gets blasted from the Ark of the Covenant, for trying to keep it apparently from falling on the ground or whatever. Nobody ever reads the middle parts of Job. We read the very beginning and the very ending, but nobody ever reads the poetry. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like, there's this whole other dimension to this book I've been handed and told to read from start to finish, that you can't apparently make a Sunday school lesson out of or a sermon out of very easily. And those were clearly the interesting parts. Mm-hmm. They were clearly the parts that, you wanted to find out what was going on in. And so that's not so much existential, but it's intellectual. And it's existential to the extent that, I felt I had this secret. If nobody else was reading this but me, in this, I wasn't going to ask a question about it. I was going to keep it to myself. And it was going to be my, not my uplifting time with God, but my time with this puzzle, this ancient puzzle of whatever these dudes were writing this stuff down and what they were about and why somebody thought it was important to keep that around such that it got to me. I always felt this incredible gratitude to the people who made the canons and the people who transmitted text, that they left in this crazy, difficult, strange stuff. They left in the Song of Songs, which is, so weird. And so it's such a strange and profane thing to be in a sacred book. But because those layers got left in, there's always stuff to excavate. And that's always what got me excited, was this kind of excavation.
Mm-hmm. So when did your, that process of excavation, this, encountering the ancient puzzle and thing turn towards, like, when did your resistance to what was handed to you first emerge? And you thought, I need to keep thinking about this.
Yeah, there were a couple of big breaks in my life, in college, of course, and in grad school. And like many people in college, I started getting a real religious studies education rather than a religious church education, a Sunday school education. And I decided that the two things were incompatible and couldn't be. And so I decided I had to find out more about it, but I thought I'd be finding out more about it from a purely academic, secular religious studies perspective, not as a person of faith. And it wasn't until I got to grad school and started studying at the University of Georgia with a man that I dearly love, who has the wonderful name of Willpower, Dr. Willpower, who introduced me to the idea, and he was a philosopher who's really into logic. So he introduced me to the idea that some of these great logical puzzles about God's power, God's knowledge, and God's goodness could actually be thought about with different premises. And that's when it was like, okay, mm-hmm. all this stuff that turns people into atheists when they're in college. You don't have to have the premise, you don't have to start with the premises you're handed. You can actually, again, that thinking about the archaeological nature of the text and the Bible and Christian thought, the realization that those premises had a history, and that you could delve into why those made sense at a certain time, but why they might not make sense now. And that goes back to talking to ordinary people. The worldviews, the philosophies, however inchoate, however unexpressed, that people have in their heads that make it possible for them to go through their day, make it possible for them to live in the world, are not at all the philosophies that underlie Orthodox Christian doctrine. So trying to figure out what works for people actually isn't just an exercise in dumbing something down. It's an exercise in understanding what worldviews need to underlie any coherent, adequate theology today.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I think is people are taking more, or at least we're becoming more conscious of, is that belief in God is not like necessary culturally or rationally or something like that anymore. And so it really shifts the way culture or the unexamined or unexpressed or cultural metaphysics or commitments that people have but don't reflect on really end up shaping then the way we come to these kind of historic big questions humans have asked around campfires forever. And I wonder, when you're doing your work in interviewing, quote, normal people, whatever that means, when you're doing qualitative research, like, what are the kind of unexamined metaphysical or philosophical commitments you see in running across culture, and what are they similar or different from the ones that exist in the academy that kind of tilt towards any affirmation of the religious, the transcendent, and that kind of thing is, wishy-washy?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about the current research I'm doing, which is on people who made pussy hats for the Women's March on January.
I feel like you should just say that again, because it's good for podcasts.
Pussy hats. I've gotten very used to saying pussy hats. It's not a word that tripped off the tongue when I started doing this research, but there it is, pussy hats. So you remember these as these pink knit or crochet, mostly sometimes sewn hats with the little ears that stick up. And they were a project that was done by these two women in California, and they got people to make them all over the country, and people wore them at the January 21st marches the day after the inauguration. And I know a lot of people are doing work on that march, but the part that I could do, because I knit and because I'd done prayer shawl research in the past, is I could talk to people who made those hats about what kind of meanings they were intending or thinking, and what their reaction to the meaning of the existence of the hat was. Some people marched with them. Some people just sent them off. Some people gave them to friends who marched. It's a whole variety. I interviewed 206 people, I think, who made those, and got data from 800 and some odd who made them. So one of the questions I asked them that goes to what you were saying is about the two things. The rhetoric of love that was in the Hillary Clinton campaign, love trumps hate. How did that work for them? Is that something they could endorse, or did they feel that was naive? And that gives people an opportunity to talk about what love means to them, and whether there's a spiritual dimension to that or a religious dimension to that. And so I talked to some Unitarian Universalists who were like, the hate has no home here campaign. And they really took that message to heart, and they thought that love is the only basis on which you can build some kind of community. And then I talked to people who said, there's a time for love, but then there's a time for anger, and love is not going to get us anywhere and Jesus, had to get angry at people sometimes, and these kinds of things. So you kind of get a sense of what people are finding useful in what theologians sometimes call the deposit of faith, in what they've received. And then another question I ask them is whether they're optimistic about the future. And again, that brings up a kind of a whole worldview about whether you think this is a turning point in history, whether it's a blip in history, whether we've been on this trajectory for a long time, whether whether that trajectory is up or down, whether you think history is just kind of meanders around. And that, of course, has a very spiritual, very religious significance to people who want to draw that out. So that's the kind of thing that I think these questions that aren't necessarily about religion or about spirituality, but when you combine that with what people tell you about their background, about their current practice, about what kind of communities are important to them, you can start to draw some lines between how people feel about this current moment, what they're doing about this current moment, and an overarching worldview that has a theological element to it.
Mm-hmm. So how do you understand something like that that's connected to a movement, but it has a community, a culture, a materiality that's connected to it? Like, not everybody can knit, right? And then, so like making pussy hats, knitting it, these are material things that can either come as gifts or you're making your own and things like, what role does something that's in a part of a larger community when it has this materiality, a community, it functions as a symbol? What kind of insights do you gain in kind of narrowing to that area?
That's what's so cool about this particular research topic to me, is that people really felt strongly about that very thing, that when we're participating in this movement, a thing is made, and that thing has a life, and that thing appears in other people's worlds. It appears on news reports. It appears in the spaces people occupy. It has this enduring quality. So it's not simply symbolic. It's actually functional. A lot of people told me the thing that was great about this was this march was going to take place in January, and people were going to be cold, and they would need a warm hat. And you can make a particular kind of warm hat that has a function, but also has a statement. And so that intersection of the symbolic and the material, as well as many people told me, when you make something like this, you can keep it. And I wanted to make this because I envisioned myself years from now pulling it out and telling my daughter about the march and about what we were trying to do and about that moment. So that's what's fascinating to me, is that this material object intersects with all of these ideas, but the ideas are in a person whose hands are making the thing. So it all focuses in on what's going through that individual's head. How is that individual receiving the messages from the people who organized the project, from the people who commented on it on Twitter or whatever, when it goes out in live, when it appears on the cover of Time magazine? How is all of that being received and processed within that individual who made that to form a kind of meaning about that event in their lives?
Mm-hmm. Well, something that kind of comes to mind, and I'm interested in maybe even a better way of asking the question, but a lot of what you shared about the insights, questions, engagement you've had with those, you hear responses that are about recognition, or the desire for recognition, that they're there was this moment, that they have a voice and a place, and at a time where you feel because of Trump's election and everything, that you're being dismissed if you have a progressive, open, accepting voice and this type of thing. What role does once you do that, you kind of feel like you're in the minority, even though not for the popular vote, but
Right.
you feel like you're in the minority, and that shifts the way you speak, advocate, and enact the same convictions. And somehow, conservatives, traditionalists and stuff, and Trump and company continue to use the rhetoric of the persecuted minority, even though they're in charge of the House and the Senate and the presidency and the Supreme Court. So is there any thought or conversation from the group about how they want it to be seen or heard by people who aren't going to the march and aren't going to be retweeting sweet pics of their friends and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the things about the march that I think a lot of people are going to be working on and doing research on is about the engagement of people who had never politically engaged in this way before. So I got a really interesting viewpoint talking to people who were, had protested a lot of things before. One of the questions I ask people is, how many protests have you ever been, marches have you ever done in your life? Or was this the first? And what kind of things did you march about? So I had some people who were really experienced in that and had done that a lot. And then I had people who was like, I've never done anything like this before. So I think a lot of people are going to be looking at that because it creates a problem for the march, is that it drew in so many neophytes in a way. Are they dilettantes? Is this a meaningful act? Or is it just something that white middle class, upper middle class people can do to make themselves feel better? It's always the problem with protesting today. I found that people felt really compelled to put, again, their time and their bodies on the line. Many people emphasized to me that, making a hat, you could make these things pretty quick, but pretty quick to a knitter is 3 hours.
Right.
It's a commitment. And I talked to people who made dozens. I talked to one person who made nearly 200 of them. So that's a lot of time. And many people emphasized to me that they were trying to say with that handmade hat, not something that you could go buy, that all of these people, thousands and thousands of people around the country, around the world, I talked to people around the world, were willing to take their precious time to do something to make this statement. That's more significant to them than retweeting something. It's more significant to them than clicking on signing a petition. It had something to do with investment, but investment, again, in that very material way. And to see that investment show up in a public space, in a material form, many people emphasized to me, a lot of those people who marched and wore hats didn't make their own hats. And so the hats that were on their heads were another person being present in the form of that thing that was made for them. And so it brought in all of these people who I always think of it, Tripp, theologically in terms of the great cloud of witnesses that that Paul says surround us. There's this penumbra, this huge unseen penumbra of people who supported this by being present in that material object. And they didn't all mean the same thing. I don't want to flatten out what they mean. That's the whole point of me talking to them, is to find out what they mean. There was a lot of people who had reservations about participating in this in many ways, and some people who decided not to, and some people who did it despite their reservations, and some people who were real enthusiastic about it. But they were all present in those photos you see. They're present too. They're invisible, but they're visible in the stitches of that hat.
When you think of the the nature of kind of political engagement today, I mean, I think there's a strong contrast to be made between the pussy hat and the red "Make America Great Again" that was made in China, purchased on the internet, and the moment he doesn't do what you want, you make a video of yourself burning it. I mean, like, it's the contrast between the two are really different images and pictures of what citizenship looks like, or public engagement looks like.
Yeah. Believe it or not, and I made some pussy hats. That's how I got into this. I made some pussy hats and sent my best friend from childhood marched in DC and wore my hat. And so, believe it or not, though, until I started talking to people months later, I had not made that connection that the image of both of these movements is a hat, a thing you wear on your head, but that they couldn't be more different. That one is handmade, and therefore they're all different. They're all individualized. They all represent somebody's hands actually moving, making a thing, taking time. They're all, sourced from the individuals who did make them, versus, again, the red mass-produced trucker hat that was imported and was bought. And many people emphasized to me the importance that the pussy hat is not bought. Now, this was not universal, because, again, this was not like a dictate from on high somewhere that you couldn't buy your pussy hat. But many people felt strongly about it. They felt strongly that people shouldn't buy them, that it should be a non-commercial, non-market, non-capitalist gift exchange. And that they felt offended if somebody opened an Etsy shop and sold them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's that contrast goes so deep and has so many different layers. I think it's really interesting. But as you say, one aspect of it is the nature of the political commitment in terms of time, in terms of investment of self.
Well, I mean, I think the contrast is helpful, especially if you think of how much discussion the two hats had. You could almost talk about there is like, even if you take the analogy and use it to faith, there's like pussy hat Christianity and MAGA hat Christianity. One is mass-produced, imported, shipped around, and is a symbol of a finger towards a whole bunch of people you have no interest in getting to know. And the other is unique, created, comes out of a community, that's built out of community, not based on economic exchange, and is there to really point people to the full humanity and dignity of people that are essentially objects of sexual violence that the president, brags about. Like, I mean, it's similar. It's a similar contrast into why I like the image of like homebrewed Christianity, because there's Miller Lite and it tastes like chilled urine, and and it tastes the same, and it can be found all over the place. And then there's something you take time to make, craft, and share with your friends, and that experience really only happens once.
If you could just rewind 90 seconds, Tripp, and transcribe what you said. Please make a blurb for my eventual Pussy Hat book. I don't have a publisher yet, but I'm sure there will be one. That would make a great, description of, that kind of spiritual and community significance of this.
Well, I feel like the cover of the book, you could have like Buddy Jesus wearing a Trump hat, and then, and then like this Hebrew Lord picture with a pussy hat on, and
sure, absolutely.
The chance you don't pick that book up is small. Like if you go, you're like, whoa, is that Buddy Jesus wearing a Trump hat and this Hebrew Lord wearing a pussy hat? I want to read this.
Yeah. It's. You talk about the conversation between the MAGA hat and the pussy hat, and I almost had this kind of cartoon image of the two things with speech bubbles that coming out of their heads, talking at each other or past each other. And the past each other part is important, because I think the misunderstanding, whether it is willful or simply a a non-communication was something that a lot of people talked to me about. There was a tweet on January 21st during the marches that many people mentioned to me in our conversations, even though I didn't ask about it. They would bring it up spontaneously. And it was this tweet from the Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, I think. I hope I'm getting that name right. His lawyer tweeted, I hope, those were made in the USA, the Pussy Hats. I hope they were made in the USA. With a picture of, the march in Washington. And the thing that the Pussy Hat makers found so amusing about that is that there's either a willful misunderstanding or simply a lack of imagination to realize how possible it is for thousands of people to make tens of thousands of handmade hats. I don't know how many there were. I'm way underestimating it, I'm sure. There's no way to count how many there were. But there were, of course, millions of people marched, and a lot of them had pussy hats. So can you really imagine, again, going back to your homebrewed example, the power and commitment and productive creative energy that can come from a lot of people doing something individually and then aggregating it all in one public space. I think it's just a failure of imagination. The only power that a lot of us can imagine doing something like that is a power of industry, is a power of Adam Smith style capitalist division of labor, where you turn the widgets on an assembly line. That's what cranks stuff out. The idea of a cottage industry being able to do something like that is just beyond a lot of people's imagination.
No, I just wish like 1/4 of those hours were used calling Michigan before the election.
I know. Well, it's an issue. It's something that people felt like, where were all these people before? And I certainly have heard that from people. No, I don't think anyone really expected what was happening to happen. And so, in retrospect, I would have preferred not to watch a movie the day before the election, but I was like, I already voted. Yeah, I know. Well, I was just pulling some demographics off of my survey in preparation for a presentation I'm doing next week on it. And 85% of the people in the 800 Pussycat makers that I surveyed voted for Hillary Clinton. But that's 15% who didn't. Some of them were overseas, but some of them were Stein and Johnson and even Trump voters. And
that was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It was. And I heard even from people who talked to me about how their friends and family reacted to being involved this way. Many of them, and maybe this takes us back into spirituality a little bit, many of them had a story to tell me about their families who were Trump supporters, the people they couldn't talk to before the election. And then after the election, they wanted to tell me a story about how their mother asked for a pussy hat or wanted to make one or liked a picture of the pussy hats they put on Facebook or there's some kind of story about a signal of transformation, a signal of an open line of communication. I think that's something a lot of us were looking for after and during the election. A lot of us agonized over. And so some of them had stories about that they wanted to tell.
So as someone who lives in Arkansas, you have an up close and personal relationship with the cottage industry that is Hillary Clinton hate.
Yes.
Can you describe that, especially for people who live on coast and are not from the South or in that world? Like, can you describe that and how you see that as an exception or maybe a revelation of the way patriarchy and such continues to exist in the culture?
Wow. That's a huge, huge topic. I got here in Arkansas in 1999. So it was the end of the Clinton era. Of course, Arkansas was the centerpiece of a lot of the efforts to bring the Clintons down by delving into Whitewater or Troopergate or all of these other. Those were investigations that were done in Arkansas and that involved Arkansas people and that were constantly reported on here. So these incredible, divided feelings about the Clintons, both of them here in Arkansas, are a very, very long standing. The Hillary thing is, to me in Arkansas, it's part and parcel of the Clinton thing. Mm-hmm. The misogyny elements and the patriarchal elements get subsumed here by the kind of dynastic, our feelings about carpetbaggers that we have here in the South. Even though Clinton is, from Arkansas, he went away and was educated in an elite place. Hillary's not from Arkansas. She's from the North. She's a Northerner. She's a Yankee. People here never accepted her for that, I think. But the part of it that does resonate is the part about ambition, the part about being an ambitious woman who wants to do something other than support and be strong in that way that we know women can be strong behind the scenes. To be out in front of the scenes, to use Arkansas as a stepping stone, to something bigger, to use the husband's presidency as a stepping stone to something bigger. People resent that immensely and just have a visceral reaction to that kind of ambition. But I don't think that's Southern particularly. I don't think that's Arkansan particularly. I think that's something people all over the nation kind of had visceral reactions to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons I asked that question has to do with, I was reading Adorno recently, and in it, he talks about how Auschwitz was a relapse into the heart of violence and such, at the heart of civilization, and not an exception. And I've been thinking a lot, especially after you brought a lot of this up in the Homebrewed book, that I wonder if Hillary functions more like that. The hate she continues to get and the intensity of it is connected to a patriarchy that really is at the heart of Western civilization. And it wasn't an exception because of anything particular about her. She was just the one whose head came up in a way where that kind of demonic structure in our culture was revealed.
I think there's no doubt about it. If there's anything about this current moment that should be clear, it's that that patriarchy is not a skin that we can remove off of Western civilization and replace with something prettier. That it, as you say, it's baked deep into the structure. We're certainly seeing that being exposed in a public way in the sexual assault and the Weinstein scandals, and it was exposed in the presidential campaign, of course, as well, with Trump's own history and allegations of sexual assault and own speech, the speech that inspired the Pussy Hats in the first place. So I think you're absolutely right. And if you want more proof of it, just look at Chelsea Clinton hate. Chelsea Clinton hate is a whole industry on its own. And it is the other side of the patriarchal silencing of women, which is that oh, you cute little girl, you need to stop inserting yourself into a conversation. You need to, you're young, you have no authority here. And see how that's the exact inverse of Hillary Clinton. You're old, you're bitter, you're frail. You need to go away. Your time on the stage has passed. So you're caught both ways. When is the place in the middle where you have a voice, where you have a place on the stage? There is none. You switch immediately from inexperienced and unauthoritative to irrelevant on the turn of a dime. You don't even get your mayfly day in the sun, where you get to have a place within that structure.
So we talked earlier that you're married to a TV critic and such. Can you describe what it's like to treat TV and media and stuff as a place for doing this kind of communal cultural research as a theologian, just like you're incorporating the lived experience and testimonies of individuals? What is it like to treat pop culture, TV, and these shared experiences mediated by screens as a place for reflecting on our kind of contemporary religious spiritual situation?
Yeah, that's interesting, because that conversation, oftentimes, if you're a critic, historically, it's been very one way. You're part of the audience, and so you try to speak as part of the audience, but you're not participating in a dialogue. You're contributing something, and then people take it and do whatever they want with it. In our wonderful, I'm still kind of a Web 2.0 enthusiast. I know that it's got its problems, major problems. But one of the wonderful things about it, being a critic, is that you actually do engage in a conversation. You throw a contribution out there, but that's not the end of the story of that engagement. You continue, you throw it into a community who you can continue to engage with. So I've always thought that the most important parts of our culture are the most, are in a sense the most ephemeral parts. They're the parts where we really let our real ids show, and that means that trying to think about those, highlight what they're saying about who we are, who we want to be, what we care about, and then listening to whether the diversity of how people care about it, including in ways that I deeply disagree with. That becomes, I think, one of the prime sources of data for what we're about in our culture. That worldview I was talking about that people carry around with them that works. It works for them one way or another. They're feeding that worldview through culture. They're having that worldview challenged by culture. They're having their empathy enabled or disabled by culture. And that's one of the main, and talking about politics, this is one of the main issues right now, is whether our empathy is being turned on or turned off.
So what show is it that you don't miss, you watch live, you tweet in it, and you go, the conversation this is opening up is one that matters? Oh
my gosh. Okay, there's a bunch of them, obviously.
Not everyone's married to someone that gets paid to do it.
Very, very true. Again, that idea that it's the ephemeral ones often. So it's not necessarily the prestige products that I think are doing this. Although I think they're Fargo is just raising incredible questions about community. The last season raised all those questions about patriarchy that, it was in a visceral way that people just, it wasn't stated, but people felt and people could engage with at that level. But those are the things we know are sort of important that we ought to talk about. The ones where we don't, people are consuming them and they're important to people, but we're not talking about it at a critical level, or things like reality TV. Now I'm a huge reality TV fan in terms of like The Amazing Race and Survivor. My kids are absolutely obsessed with The Amazing Race right now. We're going back and watching them from the beginning. There's this History Channel show called Alone that they're on, I think, their third or fourth season. It's one of those survival shows where they send people off into the woods, but they literally, there's not even any camera crews. They film themselves. So they're literally all by themselves in Vancouver on a rocky coast somewhere. And how long can they stay out there? Months, in some cases. What people do with their time when they've got nothing to do but survive, when there's not even any other structure. We talk about creativity here. Mm-hmm. People build musical instruments for themselves. People make boats, not just boats that can get them over to the other shore, but boats that are beautiful and that please them. People build houses that are more elaborate than they need. One person on the second season, the first thing she did after she was dropped off was she made a chair. She made a chair for herself. Having a conversation about that being on TV as something we can consume, something we can observe, what we can learn from that, I don't know. That to me is like, if Paul Tillich were still doing theology of culture today, I like to think he'd be watching reality TV.
Well, we have a reality TV president.
That's part of what makes it important, is that this the messages that are sent by something like The Apprentice actually form people's not even just their worldview. It forms their being. It forms how they engage with people who are going to turn out to be very important in their lives. So obviously, studying that is important from a positive and negative viewpoint. But I think there's a lot to be learned about the accidental, ephemeral ways narratives are shaped, and the intentional ways narratives are shaped by thinking and writing and talking about that stuff.
What do you make of kind of the growing volume of shows that feature elements of the supernatural, the transcendent, and this type of thing as essential elements of the show?
Well, that's a great question. It's you can answer it in one way just by saying, the availability of CGI technology on a level that's cheap enough to make episodic television out of has enabled these things to flourish. The popularity of comic book movies has created an appetite for that in episodic TV. So that's just kind of the economic article about it, or attitude. But the real key is, why are there so many zombies on TV? I think a lot of people have written about this and thought about this. Zombies have always been about our fear of something uncontrollable that can't ever be stopped, can only be temporarily held back. My husband, Noel Murray, wrote an article a few years ago, or maybe just a couple of years ago, about relentless horror of the It Follows, the Babadook style. Like there was like 3 or 4 movies that he brought together in this essay. And he's a horror film kind of specialist. And horror films are essentially ephemeral. They often go straight to video, and they're not marketed. They're really pure expressions of whatever is frightening us at this very moment. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that there's a relentless, unstoppable evil that we can only just temporarily contain, we can never defeat. Is it climate change? Is it cultural, clash? Is it the rise of violence? Noel really tied it to climate change, which I think is very interesting. It's just this idea, we're just going to have to live with this, whatever it is. We have to figure out a way to create an enclave, a Walking Dead style enclave, where we can have some semblance of a life, but outside of it, there's always going to be this, this mass of threat, always going to be lurking out there. That's a real negative answer to your question. But I think that sense that the transcendent right now is not things that we yearn for, but things we can't stop, things that are bigger than us, that are threats that are bigger than us. That's a big deal right now.
And I think a lot of the difference, or one I've been thinking about, is that in the past, in cultures where the reality of God is something assumed, these apocalypse narratives are ones where even if there's violence and judgment and stuff, God's setting things to right, or getting whatever needed to get done, or revealing the truth or reality or things. And now they're much more kind of dystopian type narratives where the meaning, the purpose, the thread of connection and these type of things aren't there, or might not be there, or the individuals or the characters in it are tasked with trying to make meaning, value, and purpose out of something in a world that is resisting it.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that runs right smack up against another huge trend in television and culture these days, which is sort of the puzzle show, the puzzle narrative. That Lost is kind of the example of it, where there's this big mystery and it's very weird, and you got all these pieces, and you know, people every episode are turning up some absolutely new element of this that then we have to have fan theories about, and we have to try to figure out how it's all fitting together. But that runs very much counter to what you're talking about, which is this idea that the malevolent, the forces that impact us can't be figured out. They're always finding new inroads into our past our immune systems, past our superhero teams, which are, I think one of the biggest yearnings for transcendence in a positive way that we have these days is the kind of the flaming lips waiting for Superman kind of transcendence, where, we've got all these superheroes on TV, and we kind of long, and in movies, we really long for someone to come along and rescue us. And people have made that case before, of course, that Superman is basically God. But that the proliferation of all of that right now in our culture certainly seems to have something to do with that. I mean, who's going to rescue us? Who's going to? But superheroes are flawed, and they never fully secure us, and so we have to tell that story again and again and again.
So maybe as we wrap up and stuff, share with us kind of what you're most excited about or engaging people about when they finally get your book in their hands.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, writing that book over the last, year and a half or so, right when all of this madness, this political madness was going on, I kind of feel like a lot of the, the passion and dread and hope, and righteous anger that got elicited during that time is wrapped up in that book. And I hope that doesn't make it dated. I hope it doesn't make it ephemeral, because I think those things tap into things, much larger things that are ongoing. But what I'm really excited about is really subverting the premises of the question about, what it means to be human. I think you can appreciate that. I tried to do that over and over again. It's like, if I'm going to start a chapter about gender, or whatever, my first task is to not approach that question in the way you expect it. So I hope that people, find themselves, kind of tripped up and shocked and sparked by approaching these questions in an unexpected way. And then, because my theological hero is Karl Barth, and Karl Barth always, his deal was He never ends up where you think he's going to take you. You think you know where he's going. You think you know what kind of doctrine he's going to come out with. And he ends up in this unexpected, beautiful place. And so I hope that sometimes those chapters, those ideas end up in an unexpected, beautiful place.
Well, I really enjoyed reading it. I hope you enjoyed writing it, but I'm super excited for everyone to get to read it, engage with it, and hopefully I'll be able to talk Donna into coming to one of the theology beer camps this next year when the book comes out, so y'all can all come hang out with her in person.
I would love that. I'm not a beer drinker, but if you have alternative beverages, I will consume them.
We have alternative beverages. We all palates matter.
Yes, I will do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to join me.
Thanks, Tripp. It was a pleasure. And thanks to all the disciples out there, all the deacons. We appreciate you. Thanks for supporting the series.